Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at NAB Show. My name is Vinciane Ngomsi, and I am a reporter and digital creator at Boardroom.
Hi, guys. I'm Thayer Lavielle. I'm the managing director of The Collective at Wasserman, which is a sports and entertainment agency. Nice to see you guys.
And this afternoon, we are going to be talking about women's sports, of course, and unlocking new markets and opportunities in the industry. So before we get started, Thayer, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into it. For those of you who are new to the women's sports industry or want to become more familiarized, I want to start off by giving an opportunity for Thayer to talk about her work. And if we have time, we'll certainly take some questions. But that being said, Thayer, how did your story in women's sports begin?
Really, when you go way back, I have 5 older brothers. And so it was like, that was the currency in our house was sport. So you better be somewhat competent.
Right.
So it was a lot of sticking my elbows out and just trying to arrive. But, eventually, played in college, played a couple sports in college. And then have just kind of never really played anything professionally because at the time there was no real options beyond that. And I probably wasn't good enough anyway. But then really got into sport, re-entered into the sports space when I actually worked at L'Oreal. I ended up doing a sponsorship deal. I was running a bunch of different European fragrance brands, one of which was called Drakkar Noir, which many of the people from the 1980s will remember Drakkar. Can I get a holla? Right? Yeah. All the ladies loved it in 7th grade. And we relaunched this brand, and with Dale Earnhardt Jr., who at that time was just a very young man.
Mm-hmm.
And we had massive success. So that was the first time that I'd ever been in NASCAR, but it was really a first foray into sport. I eventually had 2 kids, living in New York City, and my husband and I were like, no thanks. And Dale and his sister kept saying, come and work for me. And I was like, I don't know about North Carolina.
Mm.
Quickly, I realized that was a great place with grass and trees. So we moved. I worked for him for about 4 years, and then I ended up at Wasserman after that and have been here ever since and have really worked across all different areas of sport since and entertainment.
And for those, and Wasserman does wonderful, great work, but also you work certainly on the Collective. And so I think that is just a great way to segue into my next question. What is the origin story of the Collective specifically? Yeah. And what were your initial goals or Wasserman's initial goals when you thought of the idea?
Sure. So Wasserman is largely, it's an entertainment and sport company. So it has a couple primary functions. One is talent representation, where we represent some of the best athletes, artists, entertainers around the world. So 51 sports, we have athletes across the world. A fraction of those are women because it's harder transactionally to make money on women, because we're just not paid as much in the field of sports, women's sports. We represent about 2,400 musical acts. We do all of their live touring. Mm-hmm. And then we represent many, many entertainers, producers, comedians, things like that. The other side of our business is largely consultative. So it's everything from research and insights using all of these amazing tools out here to be able to help drive an understanding of who is the fan, how does that drive a partnership, how can we negotiate value, execute, activate, celebrate, create campaigns, do Facebook's marketing on TikTok, run all sorts of measurement tools. And so the Collective sits in between all of that, and really was started as a way for us to look at how do you create the lens of, create all of this business through the lens of women, and how do we take all of the best that we have at Wasserman as a huge leadership portion, or a portion of our leadership internally are women. And so we were like, we have the legs to stand on. So many of our brands and property clients have very senior women at the top. And we were the first agency to really dive into representing women athletes long before it was cool, like in 2002.
Yeah.
So it was really this origin story of how do we actually galvanize all of these efforts that we're doing to be able to push for better change for women as athletes, as executives, as fans, as consumers. Because women are underserved in all of those areas.
And I think it's so important to sort of understand when you talk about how women functioned in the corporate world, a lot of that comes from their performance as athletes. And so obviously I played soccer. We were talking before this that you played field hockey and lacrosse.
Yeah, and ice hockey.
Right. Yeah, and ice hockey, correct. And so a lot of times, I think I read this stat, several years ago that a lot of women, young girls drop out of playing sports at the age of 15, 16 because they don't have the access to it, or they probably don't see people who look like them they can use as a blueprint. So the collective is really important to see that, especially if you're not going to go into sports professionally, like neither of us did.
Right.
We will at least work on the journalism side or on, in the front office side. So have the goals of the collective changed since you started it?
Yes, because I had no idea what we wanted it to be when we started it. We wanted first, for it to be something that really helped serve our talent, because we represent some of the best women athletes. At that point, we were only an athlete or a sports agency. We've since acquired a music and entertainment agency. So we represent people like Paige Becker's national champion, Paige Becker.
Yes, as of like an hour ago. Let's go.
So, or Brianna Stewart or Alex Morgan. We have just this incredible roster. At first it was really about how do we start to leverage what we're doing on the consulting side to really benefit and vice versa. And what it's really developed into is a play where, just out of sheer curiosity of how do we actually understand what's going on for women and with women as fans, as consumers, first and foremost, and then as athletes and executives, how can we better drive our business to serve? Meaning we will all go further if AT&T is investing in women, if Gatorade is investing in women, if, insert brand or insert property is investing in women. And so that's really where our business model sits today, is like we spend a lot of time and resource of our own thinking about and producing research and insights, which I think there's a QR code that'll come up at some point, that is everything from what's the value of a women athlete to what's the deal with Mexican women's soccer to, how do you look at the investment landscape for women's sports today? So part of that was just advocacy, like let's get curious on stuff. The second piece of it was really how do we actually then serve our brands and our properties to be able to develop real tools and real services that help actually transform the women's ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? It basically says like, hey, we have a really cool way of valuing like the jersey patch valuation on somebody's, on a team's logo or whatever on their jersey. What we said was, actually, can we please look at this differently for women's sports, because you can't compare them equally, because men's sports have often had 50 years of a runway on women's sports. And so how do we actually look at the fan engagement differently? How do we look at the fervor and the loyalty of women's sports fans differently? And how do we actually start to dive into the metrics that create revenue into 40 different variables, and then be able to play with that equation a little bit so everything starts to be upvalued? That's how deep we go into this, because ultimately we want to make sure that teams like Angel City or North Carolina Courage or whatever, any PWHL team or whoever's coming down the pike, is truly able to upvalue themselves with defensible math in a way that says, no, believe in us because we're believing in ourselves, and here's where we're going.
And what is so fascinating about women when you invest in women is that I don't want to certainly compare investing in women compared to investing in men, but you see that there's a lot of relatability when it comes to investing in women. I mean, just off of the strength of like makeup and hair, like you said, with Dove. I mean, everyone wants to smell good. Everyone wants to look good. Everyone wants to perform their best. And when you look good, you feel good. And I think that there's a market there that we probably hadn't tapped into, certainly from the coverage, from the journalism side of seeing like, yes, these athletes are really, when you see, how do you get your makeup to stay? Like there's a setting spray for that.
Eyelashes.
Right, exactly. Like 100%.
Wow, they're wearing fake eyelashes. And I was like, yeah, it's awesome.
And there are so many key factors driving this growth. But in your opinion, from everything you said and with what the collective is doing, what are some of the distinguishable key factors?
To the success of what?
Of just getting female athletes to be able to land these amazing deals, signing them to your agency, just everything in between.
Yeah. So we typically will sign athletes in particular, speaking of athletes, who are also really willing to start to make change for other women. And so we have a track record of signing and working with women who are really aiming to change the game and kind of elevate it for the women coming up behind them, which is incredibly exciting. What we do at the collective is everything from look at some of their best practices. So like Simone Manuel, who's an Olympic swimmer, was one of the first African American swimmers to medal in swimming, and she was also one of the first athletes ever to have an inclusion rider in any of her contracts. Like, people were like, what is an inclusion rider? Well, for a young African American swimmer to be able to have somebody on set who understands her skin tone and her hair texture and how that might actually be different for her versus Paige Becker's, that's wildly important when it's your hair and it's your skin tone. You want that adequately represented in all of the material that's being created for you. So her agent, Lindsay Colas, created this inclusion rider and had that included. And so we've iterated on that time and time again, and even rolled that out beyond that to a lot of our male agents as well, to ensure that those inclusion riders are actually now pretty standard across the board. Maternity clauses. We were one of the first agencies to really push on maternity clauses with huge companies like Nike or other big sponsors to be able to say, no, like, we need to ensure that women these women athletes are still protected, even though they're out having a child and like grown an entire human and then need to actually go give birth and care for it for a little bit. And so we're able to start to standardize that and roll that out across all of our agents around the world. And really encourage other agents and agencies to do the same.
And with all the work that you are doing, certainly it arrives with some challenges, unfortunately. And and that's not without saying that women's sports grows at an exponential rate, but there unfortunately are people who doubt the potential of it long term. So how do you overcome those challenges or those tribulations that might hurdle you from advancing to the next step?
Well, let's set some things in reality. So women's sports, Deloitte just came out with an incredible study that said, women's sports is going to do $2.35 billion in revenue this year. Holla, that's amazing, right? Okay, but the big ecosystem of sports is still $543 billion. So we've got some work to do, guys. Everybody sitting here, everybody in this entire building, we all just need to continue to lean in and think about, who are we hiring? How are we supporting and thinking about activating around or testing and learning within women's sports? What a great platform to be able to go in and say, I want to actually test and learn with some technology, or I want to test and learn with some, different ways to negotiate deals, because why not? It's a great laboratory for the entire ecosystem. Oftentimes men's sports is too big to fail, so they're a little bit more hesitant. Or maybe more hesitant until something's completely foolproof. Where women's sports, I think most leagues are like, yeah, let's give it a shot. So I think that there's an enormous amount of upside, but the reality is we still have a very, very long way to go.
And I want to point out something, if I can point in something. I think that the easiest example about that is you see on Fanatics, for example, every single male athlete has their jersey on there. But I do remember last year, the goalkeeper for the women's national team, she didn't have her kit up on Fanatics. And people, obviously, after the success that they faced in the Olympics and the run up to that, people were rushing to go and grab her kit, and it wasn't there. Same thing with Caitlin Clark. It was the exact, in sort of the Midwest in Indiana. Of course, you could find her jersey everywhere, but you couldn't see that in Florida or California or New York even. And so there was a really big push to sort of have it so that you could get these player jerseys everywhere and not just in the markets that they play in. And I think that that's a part of the mission as well, is making sure that there's that visibility. Like you said, the men are always going to have their presence there, but it's an extra push to make sure that just because you support the Indiana Fever and you live in New York, you still deserve to be able to walk into a Dick's Sporting Good and buy her jersey.
Totally, because as fans, we're not just localized fans anymore. We're not little tribal fans anymore. I mean, I'm a huge Patriots fan, so meeting Jason was like, what? But I don't live in that market, so I can't imagine that everybody that's a Caitlin Clark fan or idolizes her as a little girl who wants to stay in sport lives in that market. Mm-hmm. And so I think that Fanatics is making progress on it. They're not the only option, but they they are the big option. That issue was started, or not started, but was evident also in 2019 during the World Cup, when a lot of men actually wanted to wear Alex Morgan's jerseys and they just didn't make them in men's sizes. So we have made some progress. There's still a long, long way to go. But what I want to make sure of is to be able to be self-congratulatory on it is very important, because we still have to take stock of the fact that we collectively, with people, so many more eyeballs and so many more people attending events and so many more people sponsoring and so many more people really leaning in, we have made massive progress. But we need to not let our foot off the gas. And in era where geopolitically things are shifting so dynamically, this is at least where the collective sits, is we just want to lean into the business case around women's sports. We just want to make sure people know there is a return in it, that what has really been evident over the past 5 years is that women are really good at sports. And people are showing up to watch, and people are showing up to watch in person, and people are showing up to watch on TV, and people are buying their merchandise wherever they can find it, and people are willing to sponsor and lean in. And so if we can continue to show the rationale for that, amazing. Now, I will also say there's a huge rationale to us as fans and as consumers. So if we, women, are driving 75% of discretionary spend around the world, and we just did a study last year on women as sports fans. 72% of us consider ourselves avid sports fans, self-proclaimed avid sports fans. 1 in 4 of those people consider their sports fandom one of the most important things in their life. So how, as sports experts, are we not doing more to tie into her pocket in a deeper way? Like, we need to understand how she's spending, what that's about. So that's our next study, which comes out in June, which we're really diving into, like, who is she as a consumer? How does that differ by generation? Because I can tell you, as a Gen X, my daughter, who's a Gen Z, is way different. And what are the nuances there? And what can we learn from that as it overlaps with sport fandom? So there's just still a lot we don't know.
And that is so true. I mean, I can definitely am part of the 72% that considers myself an avid sports fan. And although we were riding the winning wave for a while, my Chiefs were dethroned in February, so I'm not going to bring that up, but, I'm still going to support it, and I'm still going to be out there like how you are, right? Go Patriots. We both have experienced the dynasty of winning. But speaking of just like watching sports in general, as we were getting ready, we were watching UConn win, and Coach Gino had said, when he started 40 years ago, only 100 people were in the arena when he was coaching the team. And now, I mean, Tampa is sold out. Last year, I was in Cleveland. Rocket Mortgage was sold out. I mean, people are paying upwards, and we're seeing that also on TV. And people are tuning in. Sports bars are putting it on now. I mean, I'm sure that was the case earlier. So how do you think media, and I'm asking for myself as well, can play a bigger role in making sure that we don't let our foot off the gas?
I think it's a couple ways. I think kind of the guts of the ecosystem, which you're seeing a lot of here in terms of the technology and the tools that are being developed. There should be a consideration set in terms of how can we think about where and how this can benefit women's sports or women in sports. Is one way. I think another way that is to make sure that you have storytellers that are women, because I think women often want to tell stories about women. And that's no slight against men, and shout out to all the guys that are here. That's no slight against men who are also, supportive of women, but oftentimes we just sit in our own ecosystem or our own orbit, and we don't think intentionally about these things. And so to really encourage and bring up other types of storytellers is important. And to our discussion earlier walking in, like, to bring up women of color and to bring up, women who come from completely different backgrounds from what is traditionally available, is going to be also mission critical. And then I think to be able to, persist in how we create abilities or opportunities to view. So not only through broadcast and streaming and traditional broadcast deals, but where I feel like women's sports has a long way to go, or in many sports in general, is in aggregate working together to create more innovation and more engagement in storytelling around athletes holistically, and making sure that their stories are out there, because ultimately they are the ones that are attracting these viewers. Oftentimes people are saying, oh, I want to watch women's basketball because it's on, but ultimately they want to watch, specifically Paige or specifically, I don't know, Angel or whoever it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I got into journalism, especially specifically sports, because I'm African and I didn't really see a lot of African athletes being spotlighted the way I wanted to. So I figured I would start that lane myself. And I guess so far so good.
It's interesting though. We just did this, I'm going to say this a lot, but we do a lot of studies. We just did a study. It was actually through our think tank. We have, 20 schools that are in a think tank, and, two of the professors, one's from UConn and one's from UMass. They ran a study in 2019. This is not out yet. Hot news. In 2019 that said they went and asked women's basketball fans from the WNBA men and women, how they actually participate in their fandom. And it turned out something like 28% of them were what we call ISO fans. They had nobody to share their WNBA fandom with. 28%, y'all. 28%. Like, what an opportunity to go capture those people and say, what are you missing in community? What exactly would do you need in order to continue to be, better fans or more engaged fans? Maybe they don't want to be. I don't know. So we decided, we were looking at this and we were like, okay, the entire ecosystem though has changed since 2019, really. So we went out, we reran the data, and we included NWSL and PWHL, and the stats are still, they're much lower than 28%, but they're still surprisingly interesting. What an opportunity. But what we also identified was duo fans, people that only want to go with one other person, and then social fans who were like all in around other people. Another interesting stat about this though was that 50% of the fans that we surveyed, which was almost 1,000 fans, said they identify first and foremost as women's sports fans before their team, before their league, and before an athlete. Yeah. So they are in it to support women's sports, which
regardless. Okay. That's
interesting, right?
Yeah. And it's really great because now you see a lot of bigger markets. I'm in the DMV in DC, and you see now we have, a soccer team, of course, but there are so many different silos. You're in North Carolina, the Courage are there as well. And so, yeah, people are flocking to Audi Field to watch the Spirit. So that's really phenomenal.
It's fun. Yeah. Fun.
I want to get into now the milestones. We've talked a lot about, who you represent at Wasserman, the collective, and the things that you've done. But what are some milestones that you can share with us that, have sort of brought everything that we just discussed, to validity?
That the collective has worked on?
Yes.
Gosh, I would say we really thrive through our clients. And so where our clients succeed is where we find success. So I would say it's things like, being able to negotiate better and more valuable deals for some of our athletes. It's things like, being able to provide data and insights to different, leagues and teams as they're, entering, or brands as they're entering conversations around partnerships. Honestly, some of the most rewarding comments I get are like, I read that thing and it was really formative in terms of how we created our strategy. That for me is the big one. Where I think we continue to play and grow is in actually the tools and services that we've created, because that's kind of quiet change. Like, we're actually going out into the marketplace and readjusting how people are valuing themselves. Like, that's not something you're out there like shouting about, but it's something that I'm out here shouting about. Like, that's cool to me. And so that is the biggest thing that we've done, is this quiet work of really going out there to help change how women and women's teams are valued like literally valued. And as we continue to do that, we've launched in the UK. We have a very big, robust advocacy and business in the UK. We also have a big business in the Middle East.
Wow.
What a region full of change and full of dynamic, potential for women athletes and for girls. I mean, the whole ecosystem needs to be built from the ground up over there. And then you look at, Australia and Asia. We just launched in Australia earlier in March, and, each market is very different from each other, and each market is very, unique in and unto itself, but it's also these same tools and resources that we can take across these different layers and entities.
If I can say that, I feel like a really great milestone was you talked about Stewie and one of your clients. I mean, she just started Unrivaled.
Yeah.
Like that is so amazing, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I had the chance to, sit down with her for a Boardroom cover story in January, and we talked with her about her starting Unrivaled. And that's the best example. I mean, she saw a gap missing with athletes, specifically basketball players that didn't want to play overseas. And she said, let's have their off season in sunny Miami. And we went down to sunny Miami and we talked about it. And I think that that's just the best example of like, you look at a gap and you just say, let's fill it.
Well, and that's honestly the coolest part about working at Wasserman is we have all of these different ways to fill it.
Yeah.
And ways to suggest that we fill it. So on the talent side, that also comes on the heels of us representing Brittany Griner and really helping, get her home from Russia. And we were very uniquely positioned to do that because of our chairman, Casey Wasserman's connection to the Biden administration, and Rika Rodman, who works and runs his foundation, Casey's foundation, used to work in the Clinton White House. So she was very connected into the State Department and into what was going on there, along with Lindsay Colas, who is all of their agents and a dog with a bone when she needs to be. And our chief of legal guy, lived in Russia, spoke fluent Russian. So it was like this weird confluence of events that we really were the best positioned to be able to help her, find her way out. And it was, an incredibly, gratifying moment when that news came. So, from there to Unrivaled is very sweet to see because now all of a sudden all of these players have options that are not, that are outside of certainly going to play in Russia. And you also have things like Athletes Unlimited, which is, actually a client of ours as well, which does a great basketball league along with some other things, with softball and
volleyball, yeah, lacrosse.
Yeah. Went away. Yeah. But, so all good. It's been really cool. Some of our other, athlete clients that do incredible things are people like Alex Morgan has an entire business or
Tribe.
Yeah. I mean, and together and they're just amazing. Sue and Megan. Yeah.
Oh my, that, even just that. I mean, you've named, first of all, what do they all have in common? They all have significant championships to their names, whether it be at the collegiate level, at the professional level, but they also just have taken their career and they've leverage that and capitalize on their success on the court, on the pitch, whatever it may be. And they parlay that into a professional career past that still puts women at the center, which I think is really phenomenal, is that they haven't deviated from that. And obviously Brittany and DT and, Stewie even, they weren't there when people were earning the likes of what we're making now, women are, but they still advocated and now we are seeing the success of that.
You're seeing the success of it, and you're also seeing the success through younger athletes that are coming up through the ecosystem. Like even in the UK, we represent Alessia Russo, who has been very outspoken about her own issues with body image and eating disorders and things like that. And 10 years ago, nobody would have talked about that. It just would have been not a thing. Now, thankfully, mental health and issues like that across the board are talked about more, but it's really, I think, in part because a lot of these athletes have led on this front and used their platform to say, here's what I'm up against, follow me or not literally click and but follow my lead and get some help.
And the best part is that there's no animosity. The fact that, DC's not oh, I didn't make that much money when I was starting off 20 years ago, but now it's like, I don't want people to be in that same position as me, because not everyone's going to be, a 20-year vet in the W and retire with multiple championships and now go on to have an Amazon series. But she wants it to be like, if you decide at 8 years you're done playing basketball, then you have the steps set up to help you succeed.
Yeah. I mean, Diana's amazing. And her future is bright off the court for sure. She's really just, she is what you think she is. She gives you who she is. But somebody like Maya Moore, again, one of our amazing clients, but she's arguably one of the best WNBA players ever, and decides at the peak of her career, like, you know what, I have a calling to go do something in criminal justice reform, and this is where I need to go lend my time and my energy, because I'm being distracted basically by basketball with this. Not my words, not hers. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, very successful there, ends up marrying the man that she helps to.
And now she's a mom.
Now she's a mom and a Hall of Famer and all of those things. So it's, these athletes that we get to represent are really special.
I'm seeing a trend. It seems like a prereq, at least if you're a women basketball player, is that you have to go to UConn. At least win a national championship, right?
Tiki Rice is
oh, true. Yeah. Which I'm also a big fan of. Yeah. But now I want to sort of look ahead. We talked about the past, the present. But looking ahead, I mean, we could look even 5 years, a decade from now. Where do you see the visibility of women's sports growing, and how do you want to play a bigger role in that?
I'm hoping that it continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. I mean, I think, both in this country, the WNBA and the NWSL have both done, new media deals, which are giving them greater visibility, greater options, greater money, and coming on the heels of those, which will be, relatively short-lived in the NWSL case, hopefully potential for even bigger and even better. So, I think part of it is going to be visibility through those traditional linear and streaming options. And then what, right? And so and then what's out here that we can start to actually activate upon and think about, how do we get this directly into the hands of our phones more aptly? How do we get this so that it's a more dynamic and unique experience for the fan to be able to really engage with these athletes, these games, the ability to purchase, the ability to, acquire new information right there in the palm of their hands. Like, there's still a long way to go. And so I think women's sports is a great way to start to test and learn here. So yes, I think that we will continue to see increased visibility, because I do, and tell me if you guys feel differently, I do believe women have proven they are actually really good athletes and they are actually really fun to watch. So I don't think that will go away. I think we need to continue to lean on the gas.
Yeah, the shortage of talented women, we're just getting started.
Yeah, exactly.
And as I know, we have some people in the audience, we have a diverse crowd, but certainly some members of the media, but also people who are probably thinking, okay, well, I didn't watch women's sports, but now I want to start. They feel emboldened to do so. What's the best way to get started?
I think just pick a sport. There's a million of them to watch. The really interesting part about sports today is that there's so many fragmented ways to engage in it. So you can engage in the WNBA, you can engage in the NWSL, which are what I would call the more traditional or more mature sports in this country for women's sports, just because they, have the most kind of set league structure and money behind them and media deals. But then there are other ones like Athletes Unlimited, which are incredible, unrivaled. We have 4 volleyball leagues you can tap into. We have a professional lacrosse league you can tap into. PWHL, which you can tap into. So there's a lot of pick a sport, pick a pony, get in there. That's what I would say. I would also say, and I think part of it really came out of the pandemic, is, people really started to engage with women as athletes. Very deeply in the pandemic, because honestly, if you guys remember, we had nothing else to do with our time other than look at our phone and watch Tiger King all day. So why not just find out how she's keeping in shape or what's going on there? And so all of a sudden we were leaning in when everybody was back to work. And so we were actually watching, well, how does she play? What is a wobble? And how do we do this? And, And we became convinced. And so I think just start to lean in and start to follow and get engaged with these different athletes.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that because my personal GOAT, Serena Williams, her husband, Alexis Ohanian, he did this really interesting quote when I talked to him several years ago. And this is when he had invested into Angel City. And he had said the reason why he decided to invest in it is because when you look at someone like the Lakers, obviously that is a storied organization. But when you look at the ownership group, you see the poster of all the owners and your name or your face might be like the tiny one right there because you may have invested $10 million, but there are people that have invested 20, 30, whatever. But he invested however much he did, and your face is bigger. And he's like, but then we share that. You had Natalie Portman, obviously Serena, they made their daughter, the youngest co-owner. And so you see just like, instead of seeing your smaller face when it comes to, and there's obviously nothing against men, but with these storied organizations, your face is smaller because they have an established group, but when it comes to women's sports, your face is bigger because you were the blueprint and you started that. And I think that's what we're getting to.
Well, we're definitely seeing more traditional private equity, venture capital, traditional means of investment coming into women's sports, full stop. That is very clear in terms of how, when you're looking at an Angel City, which, started with probably a $2 million valuation. Now it's 200. Willow and Bob bought it for $250 million a couple of years later. The Wave went from a $2 million valuation to a $150 million valuation in 2 years or something. Mm. So I think that's a pretty good return. I don't think you want to give up on that. So there is literally we believe the new economy of the sporting space is through women's sport because there's so much upside to come. And there's also so much work to do. So it's a different type of investment. You're not just putting your money in and going to kick back and watch your returns. You really have to actually actively engage in what this looks like. You have to actually participate into your network and help the team as much as you can in order to get, further ahead. And that's not always the case for most of these investments.
I mean, there's effort, but it's going to pay off.
So, so. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So I want to ask one more question, then I certainly want to open it up to anybody who has questions, obviously for Thayer, but I like to ask this to all of my athletes, execs, whoever I talk to. What's the best part about your job?
I mean, I get to do this every day. It's honestly, I really believe it's a privilege to be able to have created and to work for a company who's like, go create it, use everything that we have, figure it out. So it's truly a privilege to be able to sit there and think about how do we actually increase the benefit for women as fans, as consumers, as athletes, as artists, whatever that is, every single day. I mean, that's cool. And because we've actually done a good job at it and now we make a good amount of money doing it and we get to push out incredible research all the time, I get to do things like this. So I feel really lucky about what I get to do every day.
And I had a chance to check out the research ahead of our conversation and definitely scan the QR code because it's fascinating and it's lengthy, but it's visually stunning as well. Yeah, so it's worth the time. Yeah, thank you. So we have about, 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions, we're happy to take them. There's a mic.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you? Yeah. Oh, he's coming around. Oh, sorry. We'll get him and then you. Okay.
Okay. Real quick, I guess. Hi. All right. So I actually live in Seattle. I think something that is really interesting that I've seen in Seattle is there's a sports bar that opened probably about 1.5 2 years ago, rough and tumble, that's geared towards women's sports. Is that something that you've seen elsewhere around the country? Do you think that's like a great sign just of things to come and how we're progressing?
Yes. That's a great point actually, because there's another one in Portland called the Sports Bra, which is now franchising, around, and also goes to different events and shows up around, the world really with its, with its offering. And it's just an incredible thing to think about. Here's a bar that only is showing women's sports. So hence the reason to show more women's sports. because we have lots of TVs in a sports bar and we need to show more women in sports. Which means we need to have better media deals. We need to have more media deals. We need to be able to find these games and these competitions more readily.
Hi. I had a question about, you mentioned how, consuming media for women's sports, for example, can be so fragmented, how you connect to these players, right? What are your thoughts on the growth of, like, what do you think engagement in like a women's fantasy league would be like? Because I started, I used to play and then I wanted to be professional and then again, like you said, no pathways for me. Then I started watching women's sports after the World Cup in 2019 and then I was also banned. And what really got me more engaged was when I found a random fan-made fantasy league where I got to know who the players were. So and I've only seen fan-made ones. I've not really seen many official ones like the Premier League has, for example. What do you think the success of that would be like for a women's teams?
I think it will be nothing but upside. I'm not an expert in the A, fantasy or B, betting space. But I absolutely think anything that helps to gamify and intentionally hook in people to understand who these players are and how they do it, how they play and what their unique specialty is a benefit for women's sports. So I do actually feel like that's going to be a bigger, push in the coming years. I would also look at, how that information is actually delivered back into sports fans' lives in a way that, I think actually across women's sports, 54% of the fan base is male. So there's more men fans of women's sports than there are women, right? Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
And so to be able to engage in those, consumers' phones in a way that actually is really algorithmically targeted to them, because a guy that might be interested in, I'm making this up, NFL, fantasy football, might be a very different kind of guy that's going to go to a women's sports bar and be interested in women's fantasy league play. Maybe they're the same. I don't know, but is there a difference there? Those are the questions that we got to figure out. We got to go like test and learn. I don't know. Let's go. Maybe we'll study that.
I mean, I will add with that, there were, for example, with NBA 2K and I don't think it's called FIFA anymore. I think it's just called EA football, but there was a lot of backlash with how they were designing the women athletes. And so they're like, get back in the lab because they look crazy. I mean, they shouldn't have pixelated faces. And that was even like 2 years ago. So I definitely think that there is the fantasy league coming. I would hope that ESPN or Yahoo, one of the bigger corporate outlets will latch onto that. But as long as, in my opinion, we've got the algorithm and the back end coding, I think it's possible.
One of the things that we found out in this RBC study we did was that men athletes, we looked across a global look at, 10 different sports. So tennis to hockey to basketball, soccer, football, etc. Men make 21 times what women make on the field of play. Okay. If you don't want to beat your head on a desk, okay. So now in many cases, some of those leagues are 50 years long, older. So, okay. But what that means is that women have to go make 82% of their income off the field of play. So 82% of what I have to go make, even though I'm spending my whole life training for this, I now have to go find another way to make 82% of this? What the heck? Okay. So then they dive into their, social in a deeper way, which for many pay off. Now we're seeing younger and younger in college paying off earlier. But ultimately, even though they might have, I just saw a study today that said something like they have 14% more, kind of depth of engagement on social media, but they're covered 14% less. Wow. So this is where visibility comes in. This is where media and this is where, the ability for us to really, push forward constantly thinking intentionally about how women can play. And that's where I think fantasy can be a big solve.
I go over.
how much of the growth in women's professional sports, you already talked about the fact that the cost of entry is so much better, right? So that your ROI can be great.
Yeah.
How much do you think is attributable to women becoming more predominant in the investment circles of having that money to put in? In the person I have in mind is Angie Long in Kansas City. I mean, she's built a monster, and they're building a district, and they've done, like, everything's happened right for them. They have the best player in the league, but it's all driven off of Angie's vision, right? And so I'm wondering how much you're seeing that in other franchises.
For sure. I mean, we're seeing it predominantly within the women's football space with Michelle King, Mercury 13 coming on with Victoire. In WNBA as well, you're seeing teams that are really led by women investors.
In Portland,
exactly. I think that, yes, there is that, but I would also argue that even within the investment space, private equity and venture, there's women probably make up a small fraction of those in real leadership positions, or lead investor positions. So I think it's great that we're seeing women at the forefront, and that we want to shout about that as much as we possibly can. But, we'll take everybody's money.
On that note, thank you, everyone. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Appreciate it.